Hi, everyone. Welcome to our session on AI-powered document intelligence for automated invoice processing. I hope you all are enjoying your sessions at BB Dev Days so far. If you attended yesterday's session on using Copilot in FENXT, you probably got a sneak peek of what we're going to discuss here. But before we get started on everything, we should probably do some introductions. So my name is Hallie Hurwitz. I'm a senior product manager for Financial Edge NXT. I'm mainly focused on the procure to pay workflow. So that's everything from like an initial request to purchase something through buying it from a vendor, paying for it, receiving it, just that whole end-to-end workflow. And in FENXT, that touches areas of expense management, all of accounts payable, and some of treasury as well. I have Thomas Betts with me. I will try really hard not to say T Betts. Thomas, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. As Hallie said, I'm Thomas. There's a lot of Thomases at Blackbaud. That's why I'm known as T Betts, just to disambiguate. I'm one of the application architects working on FENXT. I mostly work with Hallie and her teams doing payables related work. So that's what I'm here to talk about today.
So in this presentation, we'll cover basically the problem that we're trying to solve in payables processing. We'll talk about how we're going to solve it or how we can solve it. Then we'll get into some of the different workflows we're planning, both as extensions of FENXT and within the actual product, and then open it up to you all for feedbacks and questions. So definitely chat any questions you have along the way, and we can talk about those at the end. So as many of you guys know, it's very common for accounting departments to be very paper-based. And when you're paper-based, that means there are manual workflows, and those workflows often live outside of technology itself. And these create inefficiencies that aren't just frustrating for employees, but they can also be a real time sink for the organization and increase costs. So here's an example of a typical AP journey for a mid-sized organization. You can see that there are a few key players. We have an accounts payable clerk, a manager, and a controller. So the process starts with the AP clerk. They receive invoices. This can come in the physical mail, so you open an envelope, get your invoice, or it can come via email. The AP clerk will manually enter these in FENXT, either scan a copy of that physical invoice, or if it came through email, you can upload it, attach it to your invoice record. And then from there, these invoices will be sent to a manager for approval. And when I say sent, it could happen within FENXT, could be emailed, or a big old stack of paper invoices could show up on the manager's desk. They'll be asked to review those invoices with what's been entered in FENXT, review all the accounting, make sure everything's good to go. The manager then will approve. At this point, it goes back to the AP clerk. They will compile a list of invoices again, this time invoices that they actually want to pay. And then this goes for another set of approvals, either to the manager again or higher up in the organization, the controller. So at this point, the controller will review, decide which invoices they want to pay now, kick some out depending on the cash flow of the organization, sign off on everything, maybe sign off in the product, sign off again on that physical copy of the invoice, kick it back to the AP clerk again, and then they can go on, print checks, download, upload EFTs, record bank drafts. So phew, that was a big, long process. Lots of steps, very complex. So this is, again, a very complex manual process. Each handoff or transition presents opportunities for error, duplicate work and long wait times. So I think I jumped this slide a little bit too soon. We are actively solving the second half of this workflow. So the payment process and actually, so approvals of payments and paying the payments as well. We're working on a product called Payment Assistant. You've probably heard me talk about it in a Spring Pub, BBCon last year, BBCon this year as well. And this allows us to basically, you choose the invoices you want to pay, and we'll do the rest from there. So in this presentation, let's focus on the beginning of that workflow. How can we help the receiving of the invoices, entering of the invoices? How can we help automate that to remove that data entry burden on everyone? So we have a few ideas of ways to solve this. Here's an example of invoice scanning. So how can we basically take away that data entry process and automatically take your invoices, create those invoice records in FE NXT? So I will pass it off to Thomas now to talk about some options that we have.
Right. So the theme at BB Dev Days and basically every company everywhere this year is, what's your AI strategy? How much more AI are you going to put in your product? I want to back up and talk about what all that means for a second. Not to burst anyone's bubble, but artificial intelligence doesn't actually exist. It's just a marketing term and a label that gets put on stuff. There is no general AI like HAL from 2001 that's going to kill us all. What does exist is individual software components that have been built that we tend to refer to as AI. So machine learning is a thing that we do, and it creates machine learning models. And that's what we're actually talking about. A model is just something that you programmatically create based on analyzing a very, very, very large set of data. And once you've looked at tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands or millions of records, that model gets pretty good at predicting what is inside them. You have all these different variables and patterns that it recognizes. And this is where it starts to be thought of as artificial intelligence, because it seems like it's doing the job of a human. It can look at an invoice and say, oh, I recognize that's the invoice number. That's the amount to pay. That's the vendor name. And that's what we're doing. But there's no magic of AI in this. It is simply a very, very trained model based on having looked at thousands or hundreds of thousands of invoices. And so specifically what we're talking about are under the heading of Azure AI. So Azure AI, again, Microsoft branded it as a suite of tools because everyone has to have AI. Inside that is their document intelligence studio. And that set of document intelligence services have different things that help with data processing. Two that we're going to talk about now are the invoice model and the receipt model. And I want to say this builds off of previous technology. I didn't call it out on the slide, but optical character recognition is something that's been around for decades. That is, I scan a document, and instead of just getting a picture, optical character recognition is something that reads the text off of that. It actually gets the letters and the numbers out of it. And once we have those, well, that might have just been great as a series of strings that are hanging out somewhere on the page. What do those strings mean? That's where these models come into play. So let's look at the invoice model. You scan an invoice or you upload a PDF and you run it through the model, and here's what it does. You can see those little boxes that it highlights. Actually, it'll tell you in this section, in this little rectangle, I saw these different things. I saw the billing address. I saw the company name. I saw the due date. All those things you want from an invoice. And what's really powerful about this is you can actually ask the model, or the model will tell you, how confident it is. Something about machine learning is it's never exact. Like, people expect exact answers, and it's always a little fuzzy. And sometimes people get stuff wrong. Like, you might just key the data in wrong, or you read the number incorrectly. That 6 looked like a 3 or something like that. Well, that still happens. And this middle column, it shows you the confidence rating. Any machine learning model is going to give you how confident am I that this value that I'm determining is the right thing. So billing address, it's like 99% confident. But amount due, for some reason, is only 88. I don't know what that means. but that's the type of stuff that gets fed into us. And when we get to a product, we might highlight, it's like, well, we think based on our AI that we threw at it, we think this is the amount due, but we're actually not that confident. We might make sure that it highlights for a human to double check that one. And so this is the opening phase of scan these documents, read all the data. And now instead of this image of a document, of an invoice, we actually get the structured data coming out of the invoice. And the individual fields that are on there are the stuff you'd want to see out of an invoice. This is what humans have been doing. You look at the file and you type this into the next piece of software. We're trying to find ways to get the people out of the loop for those processes and make it just a little bit more streamlined and faster. So you can see all the stuff you'd expect from an invoice: vendor names, due dates, invoice amounts. I think it even has details about the vendor that may have appeared on the invoice. The other model that we're using, again, from the Azure AI, so it's all Microsoft products, they have done the job of scanning in all these things. They have trained the model. This is publicly available. Anybody can go in and pay for it. Blackbaud is not, we don't have 100,000 receipts and invoices. We didn't scan customer data. We are just using models we can buy off the shelf. Again, we're not in the business of building these things. That's something that Microsoft is now in the business of, and there's other companies that do that. So here's the receipt processing. This is probably more likely. Instead of getting a nice generated PDF, maybe you did get an email as a receipt from your hotel, but how often is it just, I took a picture with my phone and it's at this funny angle? The computer is trained to be able to detect that, just like a human can read it if it's being held a little funny. And even if that receipt has been in your pocket and crumpled up and you're just trying to flatten it out, it's still able to do a pretty good job. And maybe it's not going to get everything perfect, but it's probably going to do most of the work most of the time. And that still gets to that time savings. We're going to try and reduce the load of people having to type in every field. If we can be 90-95% accurate most of the time, that's still a big win. So like, here's the list of things that the receipt model gives us. Again, all the typical stuff. If you had a receipt with lots of line items, you might see more. And I realized the heading says invoice request, but these are from the receipt. I think that's where I'm going to hand it back to Hallie and talk about some of the stuff that we're looking at for our roadmap within how we're going to add this into Financial Edge.
So we've got plans to handle some of this automation, both in the very near term and then incrementally add it within the product and our longer term roadmaps. The first approach that we are actively working on right now and will have available soon is a Payables connector, which is really focused on automating the flow of invoices received through email. So let's take a look at what this flow will look like. You can see things start with an invoice emailed to you. Once that invoice is received in a common, accounts payable shared inbox for your organization, we can use one of the intelligent models that Thomas just walked us through to do some invoice scanning on that. Look at invoice fields, look at vendor fields, and then from there, using the different functions of our Power Platform connector, we can run it through a review and approval process. So that invoice probably needs to get approved by a few different people based on that, several handoff and flow diagram I started with. So those can go to a few different people to be to review and approve it. Once all the approvals have happened, we can actually automatically create that invoice record in FENXT. And since we have a copy of that invoice, attach it automatically to that record as well. And then Thomas touched on vendor details as well. A lot of invoices have some basic vendor information at the top. It would be really if we could, grab that vendor information as well, verify if we have a vendor record already created in our system, or if we don't, we could create it. If we do, we could update the information if anything is missing from that vendor record. So you can see in this flow, the only time a human is actually needed in the loop is for that review and approval, and that's organization-based. So some people may require that, some people may not, and it could just go directly to the creation of those records if needed. So this flow will be available to you all as a template. So available as a template to FENXT customers. It can be used as is or customized. You know, BB Dev Days, we have a lot of low-code developers who can take it and further customize it to really suit the needs of your organization. So that's our near-term plan, is having this connector available soon. But what can we do directly in the product to make the lives easier for everyone? The first version that we're looking at is a single file upload. So here's an example of our current invoice list page in FENXT. And you can see we have the add button here highlighted. This is where you would go to add a new invoice record. So our idea is to put a new option at the top of this page where you can just upload your attachment right at the top. So you can click the file, choose which file you want to upload, add it, and then from there, you'll get a copy of that invoice that shows up on your window. And then we will just automatically grab each of those invoice fields that, again, Thomas walked us through, populate it on your invoice record. And then we can grab the vendor from it as well. And then if in FENXT, we have vendor defaults, if any of those are defined, those will auto-populate on this invoice as well. And together with those two things, all of the required fields on your invoice should automatically be shown. You can enter anything additional that you want, review the data, and then save it and continue on. So this is the idea for a single file upload. So one-offs, you have your file, you upload it, you can create invoices one at a time. How can we even further automate this process? So our next idea is bulk file uploads. So I talked about that big stack of invoices at the beginning. Maybe you've accumulated a group of invoices throughout the week, you've saved them on your computer, you're ready to create those invoice records in our system now. So we have the same idea here. You have your invoice list page and payables within the product, but instead of clicking the add button to add one at a time, you can click an upload button. And here you can grab the whole set of invoices that you want to create at a single time. So we'll add a few here. Let's say we've chosen the invoices that we want to add. You can see an example of this first one that shows up. And then if I scroll down, we have 3 others that show up. So that's step 1 of this workflow. We can click a next button. And then we'll get a split view here where we can see the 4 different invoices that we're looking at. And then we can work through each of those invoice records one by one. So here's that first invoice. We've grabbed all of the fields available using that intelligent model. So key invoice fields, vendor field as well. And we can review that one. We can click to the next one, review that, go on to the third, and finally the fourth. And so in this model, we could click save, and then 4 of those invoices would automatically be created. There are a few other things that we could do off of this. So I mentioned updating vendor records. If a vendor maybe didn't exist for one of these invoices, we could show something under that vendor field that informs you that we don't have vendor information yet. And then that could maybe prompt a modal, add your vendor modal. And from there, we could populate that vendor form with the key information that we've been able to read off of this invoice. Or if we notice that that vendor information may differ from what we have in our system, we could flag that here as well and ask you if you'd like to update those fields that are different. Thomas also talked about the confidence of each field. So that's another thing that we could add to this is when we populate each of these fields, we could show a confidence rating of how sure we are of that value. And that could be reviewed or could lead you to maybe pay extra attention to a certain field on this form. But you can see along the way, all of the fields are really auto-populated for you, and it just takes a quick review to make sure the invoice now matches the fields that are entered within FENXT. And then our third version is the shared email inbox. So this is a lot like the connector that I talked about in our first pass, but now this whole workflow is in FENXT in product. So it works a lot like the bulk upload, but instead of having to go to your computer, choose which invoices you want to load, and then add them, you can see on this invoice list page, we have this new tab, and this is just listening to that shared inbox. Anytime an email comes in that shared inbox with an attachment, we could grab that attachment and then show it here. And then, however many times a week you want to go in, review these invoices, get them created, and then they'll clear out when new emails come in. These could be populated here as well. So 3 different versions that we have in product that we plan to have in product. When we tie it all together, this is the better experience that I talked about at the beginning. This is what we want to provide, an end-to-end automated workflow where a human needs to be in the loop as few places as possible. So this first half of the workflow is the automation with this intelligent document scanning. The last half of the workflow is the pieces that we're solving for right now with payment assistant and automated reconciliation. So you can see, start with an invoice that gets emailed to you. You can use intelligent document scanning to automatically create those records, invoice record, update your vendor record, do some approvals along the way if needed. From there, we have a human in the loop just to pick which invoices you actually want to pay. Once that's done, we can handle all of the payments to those vendors, the follow-up with them, and then end it with some automated reconciliation where you may want a human in the loop again just for the final review. So end-to-end, pretty much automated workflow, except for a few pieces where it's probably key for someone at least to be, adding some oversight to a few of the areas. And then once we have this end-to-end workflow in payables, it can easily be extended elsewhere. So we've talked about originating with an invoice, but there's not just intelligent invoice scanning or receipt scanning, there's purchase order scanning. So we can go back to that workflow, and instead of thinking about it in terms of an invoice, think about it in terms of a request to purchase something. So somebody could, in your organization, could request to purchase something. You can get some approvals in place from there. We could have intelligent PO scanning that automatically creates that purchase order record. Once everything's been received, you can have intelligent receipt scanning that creates your receipts record and then creates your invoice record. So each of those manual data entry pieces are easy to automate in this scenario. And then same thing for expense management. Thomas showed that crumpled up receipts. That's probably not uncommon for an expense management area where your employees are out traveling, have the receipts, need to upload them into the system and get reimbursed. we could have that as well, where you go to expense management, you create an invoice request, add a copy of your receipt, and then from there we can kick off that process. Fill in the key fields of your invoice request, attach that to our invoice workflow then, and you can have that same automated end-to-end workflow. So a lot of opportunities here to really increase efficiency in the entire workflow, remove those handoffs that are causing delays, could be data entry or risks for data entry. So great opportunities here to streamline the end-to-end workflow. So those are all the slides that we had to cover. We can save some time for questions or feedback if you guys have anything. So stay tuned for what's coming, and we'll leave you with some key takeaways. So as a quick summary, just knowing that the AP process can be very manual. We've got lots of opportunity here to remove those manual steps of the data entry, and then stay tuned for that connector and other in-product enhancements.
And Hallie, there is one question that came in. I was watching when you were going over stuff. There you go.
Yeah, so we won't be changing anything of our expense management current functionality with how that approval workflow exists today, but we can definitely continue to expand on approvals within payables, adding that approval tier to the true invoice record and not just a single pending or approval state. And then we can have plans to add this type of automation to the creation of an invoice request, the creation of an actual invoice as well. I don't see any other questions yet, so we'll monitor Q&A for a bit, but otherwise, thank you all.
Thank you. Thanks for attending.